how do you think this like relates to? Do you have different messaging depending on the business, like depending on the area, like with Latinos? Like I'll share an anecdote
Okay.
um, with you. My sister works in Santa Fe. She works for a big organization that like it's kind of well known nationwide. They do a lot of great work. It's also a nonprofit. And she's a Latina, and the whole Santa Fe is mostly Latino, indigenous,
Hmm.
and white.
Hmm.
You know, and so they had the her bosses wanted to have DEI training
Hmm. Hmm.
for all of them, and the trainer basically the whole thing was how white people need to be better allies for African Americans, right? It was like literally, she said, and my sister really was excited about the training beforehand. She was like, but it was literally black and white. They didn't talk about,
Yeah.
Latinos at all. Um,
Hmm.
Nothing, just black and white relationships.
Yeah.
And um, so I thought that was really interesting, and I didn't know if that was something you wanted to speak to, if you see
Yeah,
that deal.
for sure, for sure. I think because I am a Latino professional, and I did grow up in Los Angeles, and that is a very significant issue, or an important issue that's it's been dear to my heart and my passion for the longest time. Let me give you a little bit of background. So the short answer is yes. In undergrad and graduate school, I was the one who would always raise my hand and say, wait a second, we're talking about racialized uh, uh, identity formations and institutions of power, historic in history. And we're talking about slavery. And that's the extent of the conversation we're having today. Hello, we're graduate students. It's more complex than just black and white. So I was not necessarily getting in trouble. I just had to have the courage to put my hand up and say, I'm an ally of the African American experience of my people. South LA. I'm there, dude. I'm an ally. I totally get it. Unity. Hell yeah, I'm there. But I had to be able to navigate those kinds of conversations as a graduate student to not come across as though I'm knocking my fellow classmates down, but also had to advocate for myself and for those people that look like me, because the conversation in academia for the longest time has been about black and white. And guess what? That spills over into the mainstream, and even in the diversity, equity, and inclusion, the DEI field, it's always a black and white. I totally understand why. I totally get it. So here I am today, right now is a perfect example. And in the blogs I write and in the work I do, we have to expand the conversation of DEI beyond black and white, right? And I think the way I do that and the way I want to encourage that we do that is that we recognize that yes, systemic racism is important, but it affects all of us. We're all at risk of being excluded, discriminated against, and enslaved or colonized, right? If you really want to break it down. So I focus on inclusion and behavioral change for that matter, for those very same reasons, that if we're talking about true inclusion, then you're going to have to include my black, my brown, my Asian, straight, gay, white people. And of course, you recognize there's power dynamics. I'm not going to pretend there's nothing there and we're colorblind. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm simply saying that as we approach our efforts in working and creating change, let's not forget that it's it's more sophisticated and more complex than a simple conversation around black and white allyship, right? It's conversations about power, conversations about pay inequity that affects people differently. It affects, if you're black, it's going to affect you differently. If you're Latino, it's going to affect you differently. And if you're a different male or female or gender or different gender expression, it's going to affect you differently. So it's about figuring out what we do as an organization, for example, in the business world. How do we focus on this idea of creating inclusion and understanding that it's more than just black and white.